Welcome, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well out in the world. Thank you for joining us today for today's remote webinar. We've been highly successful doing these on various topics throughout the year. We have a lot more to come in 2022 and then into 2023 as well. Just a couple of reminders before we get going. This is going to be recorded, and at the time you are on mute. However, if you have a question, go ahead and use that panel on the right-hand side, bring it out, go to the question box, and then type in your question. I'll receive it. And then at the end of the program, we will discuss those questions and so forth. Also, we are going to record it, as I mentioned. The recording itself, give us a couple days. We will put it and post it on our VITA YouTube channel, our VITA North America social media channels as well. So you can come back and you can relearn some of it, or you know, if there's an area in which you didn't catch, please visit us. On that website as well, you're going to see all of the recordings that we've been posting for the last year and a half. There's quite a few different topics, whether it ranges from digital dentures, crown and bridge, shade, photography, how to select the right material, and so forth. So there's a lot of different product categories that we have made available for you to view. They're all about an hour and a half with the Q&A, but please join us and listen to those. So to get us going here, we are talking about shade and the shade gap. Now, many of you understand that you know, there's different protocols for shade. So when we're talking about the shade itself, we are talking about you know, having the right environment, using the right tools, maximizing the tools that you do have. The tools that you do have, are they in good condition? Are we standardizing the color? Standardizing the shade tabs as far as they're all in the same generation. We know that over the years, some of the shade tabs become used up. In other words, that the gloss itself becomes worn, so maybe it's time to change those out. We need to make sure that we have a controlled lighting environment and so forth. So all sorts of these different various issues with shade taking, we already understand. It's more of a issue whether we do it or not. You know, do we go through the process to make sure that we have the right environment to take the shades? You know, it's either no more or different than a prism. Light goes through them, the light refracts, it reflects, and we visually see the spectrum of light in which comes back and is observable. So we want to use a white source, white light source, right? 55, 6500 Kelvin type light. We want it as true lighting conditions as possible. And this is for the room itself. We don't want to maybe have a room that has access to a window, because throughout the day, as it gets cloudy or it's sunny, the right angle of the light, the sun, it's going to be different throughout the day. So you're going to get different shades. Even if you had the patient come in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you would observe, you'd visually see different shades. And today's topic on shade is really to try to help you understand the shade taking, you know, the environment, and then also how to mix and match different shades so that they come out as accurately and as close to the natural dentition as possible using color. Because there are some gaps, right? We understand that the different light in your environment is going to make observable colors different. So again, we have to use that true white light, 55, 6500, to get that the correct color itself. And color is a component of shade, right? Shade is basically a designation of a color that's quantifiable. It's like going to the hardware store where you go up and say, oh, I need a blue paint. Well, you know, they're going to go, well, what color blue? What shade blue? Pale blue, midnight blue, dark blue, and so forth. So we have to create tools that are used in the industry to communicate and remember and put on a prescription specific shades that we observe or digitally record with electronic means as well. But the first step, of course, is to standardize that environment, have it so that it's routine, you have the same light conditions, try to make it the best you can as far as color-corrected lighting. Again, 5500, 6500 lighting, specialized color-corrected light. We want a color rendering index of 90 plus. Close as we can to pure daylight, white light is the best. We want to make sure that we standardize, have the patients not wear lipstick or colorful bibs. That all influences how we see the angle that we take the shade at, the distance, and so forth. And this is the same with laboratories who take custom shades as well. So this is not just for the dentist, it's also for us as lab technicians to make sure that we standardize and that we're getting the most out of the shade. So we can take any shade tab and quantify it into a color. The colors are L for value, C for chroma, H for hue. So the combination of LCH, value, chroma, and hue, and or the LCAB, LAB values, right, is a different way, quantifiable way to designate a color target. But each shade tab that we have is quantifiable. The shade tabs themselves on the classical shade system, remember, were originally designed back in the 1920s and used for mainly ceramic denture teeth. And at that time, there was a specific pigments that were used, color pigments, different type of materials, whether they were more heavily metallic materials, the oxides that we used way back then. They all designated a certain color, but it wasn't based on modern dentistry. It wasn't really based on true scientific data of what natural teeth really are as far as the color and the shade is. So we've developed quite a ways since the 1920s. We were able to quantify the classical shade system, identify each shade, kind of put it into the realm of what is the natural tooth shade area, which is really, as far as colors go, out of like 14 plus million colors that are observable, two shades are really specifically in just one area of colors. Anything that falls outside of that, such as bleach, true bleach teeth are not a natural tooth brightness. Those are usually changed or modified by using bleach materials and so forth. So you have to sometimes go out of that shade range, the true natural tooth shade range, and go a little bit more in the brighter or whiter area. But everything else should fall in within this area that we perceive as the shades of natural dentition. So after we quantify them, we produce shade tabs that have kind of mimic that shade or color range. As you can see here, this is the modern-looking shade guide, classical shade guide. We have designated, labeled arbitrarily, labeled different groupings, A, B, C, and D. A, reddish brown as far as the manufacturer goes. A is reddish brown, although most of us will look at it and see more orangish. The B, reddish yellow, but most of us will look at B range as more pure yellowish. And then C is grayish. Sometimes people call that, almost see a green to it because it's gray. It's got a little bit of other tone to it. The D, grayish reddish. For the most part, for natural teeth, the C and the Ds in human dentition are relatively rare. When we look at the grayish on the C, we're primarily looking at the incisal, the translucency. We like the C's mainly because of the grayness to them. And we often do prescriptions that have a C component with an A or a B. And then, of course, you've got extended ranges of bleach, which are non-natural, as I mentioned. But these are the 0 range. This is a 3D master I'll get into a little bit later. But those are the bleach to extend, to make it so that there's something available that's a little bit brighter than B1. But we've arbitrarily designated these labels. Are they really the same today? Not really. When you look at the colors, when you do more of a scientific outlook of them, they could be quantified as a little bit different in the color range as far as grayish, reddish gray, and so forth. This is what the newest classical shade guide looks like. If you don't have a new classical shade guide, you should be thinking about getting one. Every time we do a generational change, a format change, whether we change the guide itself, the handheld guide, or the tabs, the metal tabs, every once in a while we take those shades and we make sure that they're within what we consider our gold standard. We tighten up the gold standard to better suit what's reality as far as the materials that are matching with them. So this goes hand in hand with the materials. Howbeit that you need to understand that shade tabs, the VITA shade tabs, those are metal ceramic shade tabs. So they are utilized for a specific basic shade, something to label so that you understand that you can communicate the closest to or the close to shade that you see for that particular individual patient. This is an interesting information from Dr. Datola, who used to work with the Glidewell. And I found it interesting when he talked about where they did some study of 4 million crowns, and what was the most popular shade? Well, it's A2, and then A3 and A1. And why is that? Why was A2 mainly picked? Well, if you look at the individual shades of classic shade system, and you put them in that box of natural dentition, natural colors, A2 is somewhat on the bright end. It's kind of orangish. Most teeth are a little orangish, yellowish, maybe reddish, but mainly within that orange group. And A2 kind of fits within what we perceive as the most natural looking shade. So what do? We normally will go see a patient and we will take our A2 shade out or tab out, put it to the patient's mouth and go, oh yeah, A2, that works. A2 is surrounded by a lot of different colors, but it's also surrounded by a lot of empty space. So the classical shade system in this rectangle here, you can see where all these areas, all these gaps, color gaps, we are missing with the classical shade system. And therefore, A2 to B2. B2 is almost the same level of brightness. However, B2 is a little bit more paler, less chromatic than A2, all right? But the shades are close to, and in many patients, many people, as we perceive color, sometimes, depending on the lighting conditions, an A2 can get confused with a B2. We just know that A2 to us That's what we've selected. The B2 may be a better shade, but we're so used to selecting A2 that we just designate that as the most popular shade. And then when the patient comes back and we place the restoration, we go, oh, A2, hey, that looks perfect. It matches really well. But you can see here on this scheme here that B2, as far as the actual usage compared to A2, B2 is way down the list, right? And D4, even farther down at the end. So A2, we just kind of presume that most patients are an A2, and that's what we select. And for most cases, it's close enough to be designated as the right color of that restoration. But we have such gaps surrounding it that sometimes an A2 or whatever the color that we pick, we don't select the right shade due to, again, back to the environment, but also the lack or the minimization of the standard of a classic shade tab. The colors that were created back in the 1920s, it's just not a system that fills that gap, that empty space where it's difficult to get the closest match. So you can see here, these are data by the clinical research group. Almost 39% of mismatches are because they're too bright, 17% too dark, wrong hue or wrong color, 21%. You add those, just brightness of value alone, over half of them are inaccurately selected, the shades, due to being too bright or too dark. And then if you add in the hue, the 77%, so 3/4 of all shade mismatches are mainly due to brightness and or the color. So we try to get the closest we can with the brightness. If we can settle on the right brightness for the restoration, the color kind of falls in. So it's really that brightness, too bright, too dark, that we really want to settle on and eliminate as a factor. So depending on visual or electronic digital shade selection, when we visually assess a tooth color, we're maybe about 72% accurate, whereas digitally we can go to 99%, close to 100%. And that's to duplicate, to replicate, to see one shade, for instance, the shade tab, and match it correctly to the right tooth so that they match up. So again, visually, we have more of a difficult time to match up the right shade tab to the right color of the natural tooth that we're trying to measure. So the idea is, of course, is to take these shade tabs, bring it to the patient's mouth, and find the closest match. Again, there's such a huge gap, discrepancy between one shade to the next, the A, B, C, D range. And when we talk about the shade tabs, the only place that the gold standard is on each shade tab is in the middle third here. It's only in the middle third. These are layered metal ceramic shade tabs. That's what VITA produces. It has a opacious dentin, it has a dentin, and an enamel to it. And underlying that is a pellet of opaque, metal opaque. So throughout that, you see the blend of the color that we say is A1, A2, 2M1, 1M2. They're all made of metal ceramics. The actual base shade of each ceramic tab is in the middle third. We often look at the incisal third for translucency communication. And that's where we go to get the C range, usually. The tooth looks grayer. There's a little bit more translucency. It's grayer, so therefore I'm going to select maybe a C shade because it's got that grayness. It's got a brightness to it, but it's got grayness as well. And that's where we start to intermatch between different shades and so forth. We also make sure that we have that shade tab in the right plane, in the same plane as the natural tooth. We don't have it in front, we don't have it in back. That depth, even if it's a millimeter off, is going to considerably change how we observe the shade match. So it has to be in the same plane so that then you have the same light refraction, same light resemblance between the tooth and the shade tab. And therefore, we have an easier way to get the closest shade tab possible. And sometimes what you may want to do is turn these sideways so that you're looking at the middle third, comparing it to the tooth in a parallel fashion. So those are just good tricks to try to make sure what we do is select the right shade using the shade tabs or the tools that we have commonly used today. But as I was mentioned, there's a lot of empty space that the classic shade system does not come close to where maybe a natural tooth falls within. So if it falls in between two different shades, A3, B4, A3, D4, ambiguous, right? It's in between, it's unknown. Which one do we select? Do we select the A3? Do we select the B3? Do we select the D4? These are all grouped and all pretty much on the same plane as far as brightness goes. The difference is that some are yellowish and some are reddish. And then you have the orange in between. And I think my my video feed here is a little bit slow today. There's probably a lot of people using the internet, must be. So we'll just continue here. And then we have areas in which there's no match. There's no close approximate shade that you can designate for that particular patient, that specific patient. And the difference between the actual shade of the tooth and the shade tab, the difference there is the color space. So if you have the tooth in one area, you have the shade tab in another, that difference is a color space. And then how far do those separate until the shade that you select, the closest matching shade, classical shade matched, does it fit or does it closely match the natural tooth? At what point do we say, hey, that's too far off? Well, actually, there's been research that's been done that designates that information, which we will get into as well. So the color space itself, the distance between two shades, and in this case, I pulled out the A group, just for instance. So if you look at the A group out of the natural look here, if you look at the, pull out all the A's onto this, they're little bubbles, shade bubbles. And you have A1, which of course is the brightest of the A group. A2 is a little bit more orangey. A3 is a little bit darker, but then it's got also a little bit more yellowish to it. A3.5 is way on the red side, a little bit darker, of course. It's got more chroma to it, attached to it, but it's also got a little bit more reddish compared to the others. And then you got A4, which is even heavily chromatic, that is even designated more darker. So if you pull those out and then you start looking at them, as far as the distance, the equal distance between these this color space, they're all different. It almost looks like a chemical compound, whereas that there's no linear method to it. There's no incremental building of A1 to A2, A2 to A3. It's various within the brightness, darkness, and then also the hue, and the chroma from reddish to yellowish. So it fills in a lot of different areas, the A group. But what happens if you need a in between A2 and A3? Because these are not equal distant and they don't have all the same hue or the brightness, you can't mix A2 and A3 and get A2.5. There's nothing designated as that. Now we put in a description and say, well, it's a little bit of A2, little bit of A3 maybe. But what if it's closer to D4? D4, as far as the brightness goes, D4 is almost as bright as an A3, a little bit brighter than A3.5. And what about C2? These have that grayness, right? So it's much more darker in the appearance visually. It's more lower value. And it's got that little yellowish, grayish tint to it that we sometimes think of as green. So we have that, and then we have the natural tooth. When we map a natural tooth, it is all over the board. Because the shades are not linear, they're not together, they're not set equal distance from each other, A, B, C, D, the value, chrome, and hue added up. They're all intermixed, and therefore you have natural teeth that have multiple classical shades. So which one do you select? All right, in this instance, you select the B2, the A2, A3, B3. And we're talking about B3 here is the incisal of B3, really, because everything is modified, everything is set towards the VITA gold standard as far as what that translucency, that chroma, that hue is specific to that shade tab. So when we say close to, no one today really is going to do a lot of minute powder layering to build up a little B2 here, A2, A3, B3, and then plus consider the translucency as well. So what we do here is we have to come up with a general close to basic shade that we have to select, and then hope that it blends in with the adjacent dentition if that's what they have. So in this case, maybe it's A2. Again, it's our go-to, right? A2 is probably 80%, 70, 80% of all the shades that we select. So we go with an A2, hope for the best. That is what we can find is the closest shade that we can find that's in that shade system. And then we start writing the prescriptions and we start saying, well, mix this with that. It's half this, it's close to that. But again, you are all over the board as far as the actual colors go. So you need to start filling in that gap, that shade gap. You need to start providing information that expands your shade range, that actually incorporates other possible shades as the closest match to that natural shade. So prescriptions are great. We need pictures. We also need the photographs. We need to understand, is it textured, is it not textured? If it could be the exact same shade, the left picture, the right picture, but yet because of the texture, it's going to break it up, the light, and it's going to look different than it will a flat, smooth surface that looks more opacious, has more reflection, right? Opacious makes it more brighter looking. But visually, our eyes can't distinguish, chroma from value. It's difficult when you incorporate visually the light and the different texture, but we have to mimic the texture if we're going to try to get the target of the shade correct. We have to understand that, again, shades are not the same. And I was talking about, well, what is acceptable? Well, there's a lot of research done. Dr. Paravinas did some great work on the perceptibility, matching, does this shade look like this shade? And then what's acceptable? How far the two colors can be apart and still be acceptable. We know that at a certain distance, they're perceptible, two different colors, but at what point is acceptable or not acceptable? And so he's done a lot of work that we can perceive the color space where it's just, don't get confused on the numbers, but the delta, the number space, the color space between two colors we can perceive it at 1.7 space, color space. The acceptability, though, we allow up to 2.7. So we can perceive it, but what's acceptable is another point difference. So if you look at A1, compare it to A2, the difference in these deltas is 5.4. Then from A2 to A3, those are closer. It's only 2.8. So maybe the difference between an A2 and an A3 at 2.8 might be acceptable. Or let's look at A2 compared to a B2, 1.6. So from A2, if we were to switch into a B2, the perceivability acceptable, the delta, the color difference, is 1.6, and that falls into within the range of perceptibility. And that's why half of us can see the difference between an A2 and a B2. Let's look at B1 and A1, right? B1 we know is brighter. Comparably, A1 to a B1, 1.8. It's almost not perceivable. And then when you have, different eyes looking at the same patient under different lighting conditions, different angles, holding the shade guide different distance from the patient's mouth, a lot of these can be interchanged, and maybe you've got a better choice of shade if you kind of get rid of on your mind thought that A2 is a solve everything shade. And then of course you got B2, A3 to B2, which was the closest, that's 5. A3 to a D4, that's 3.8. So it's closer, and A3 is closer to a D4 than a C2, even though the C2 has a lot of heavy gray and brightness to it. So again, this is just information to help you understand that when we select the shade, maybe there's differences out there. Maybe the organization of the classical shade guide that we have, that we produce and put in your box, maybe that's not the best method to understand and select the shade. Maybe rearrange them, get out of the ABC, rearrange them as you see here from brightest to darkest, and then you can understand how maybe a A3 D4 is actually brighter, slightly brighter than an A3. A C2 is slightly brighter than a D4 and so forth. C1, right, as far as the brightness goes. B3 is darker than a D3. Controversial, but some people say that the B1 is actually a little bit darker than A1 because you see the yellowish, but nevertheless, this is how they're kind of categorized from brightness to darkness. So I would arrange your classical shade system more by value. That's how we see things much better, is brightness. We always know if something is too bright or too dark. It's difficult to say, well, the color is a little bit more yellowish or reddish or orangish. But bright, dark, compared to the adjacent condition, yes, that's something that we all can perceive very closely. So maybe another way is not just only match it up, rearrange your classic shade system to brightness to darkness, but then using your own interpretation of what the colors are. Rearrange your shade tabs into groups that you perceive that are closely resembled. Most of these all have, you can see very slight nuances, a little bit grayish here, a little bit more yellowish and so forth, right? But these all have pretty much the same brightness. You can take those three out there, look to me a little bit more grayer, but you can organize your shade guide the way you want it. And what we're trying to do is make sure that before you finalize your A2 selection, that you've looked at and evaluated that tooth to make sure that if there's something that's closer. And again, by reorganizing the system that we manufacture, into a more organizable, value-based or color-based by your eye method, you'll be able to accurately pinpoint the correct shade that's the closest to that natural tooth. And then if we're speaking about value-based, which we see better than chroma or color, all right, we know it's too dark, too light. Well, that's where you have to maybe add on another layer of shade possibilities. So what's the right patient for this, right shade for that patient? Well, it's the right shade, right? It's the one that best matches, closest matches to that patient's tooth. And if the tooth, the natural tooth, falls into that gap, that color gap, that a classical shade tab doesn't fit into, then maybe you expand your shade range and maybe you possibly bring on something like 3D Master, which is based on value, but it is also based on natural dentition, really a distribution of all of the natural teeth that usually they fall within that bubble of color, but it's also linear. It is designated so that it fills most of that color space of natural teeth, from bleach all the way to the darkest. And it has the three components that we see in natural teeth. It's got reddish, it's got orangish, M is for mandarin, which is orange, and then the L, which is yellow. And this is the original distribution. Almost 50% of those natural teeth measured were actually in the 3 group. The A group, A2, is approximately a 2M2, which is this one right here. So at one time, the majority of your teeth, natural teeth, the shades actually fall a little bit more chromatic or a little bit more darker or lower value than our A2s all the time. But because of cosmetic dentistry and so forth like that, we start using and seeing we want to change, have the prescription, have that treatment plan more to do with bleaching, whiter, brighter, and so forth, which is no problem today because now modern dentistry, modern materials are filling in that gap that is in the brightest range above B1 and so forth. But we still have that gap, right? We have, what if those natural teeth fall within the gap that classical can't reach? So that's, therefore, you have that 3D Master that is going to fill in the spaces in between around the classical shades. So now you can actually select a closer shade in the areas where there's no classical shade at all. And the good thing about the 3D Master, because they're linear, because they're segmented systematically, you can combine 2 shades on the layering side. On the digital side, you want to select a shade that's slightly brighter, whether it's a classic or 3D Master. Another reason why you should rearrange your classic shade guide to more value-based, because if you're going to do anything that's milled today, you want to make sure that the lab selects, or you have them select, a brighter shade of restorative material so that you can always stain it after it's placed onto the restoration, onto the prep, onto the stump, to make sure that it's not over-colored and so forth. So this is just combined. This shows the classical and the 3D Master combined in the same color group space of natural dentition. You can now see that you're not just moving over to a shade system 3D Master, but now you're incorporating the 3D Master system into your traditional classic shade system so that you have more options to choose from. So you want to choose the closest matching shade, and regardless whether it's classic or 3D Master. So this is the bubble on the classic shades. Because they have a broader, more spaced out, unevenly spaced out interconnected space between the different colors, they're broader. They have a larger spacing to them. So when you combine it with a 3D master, now what might be A2, now you have maybe 2M2, or a little bit more reddish, 2R1.5, 2L1.5, a little bit more yellowish. So now you've got more interpretation, more likelihood of selecting a more defined and better shade for that natural tooth when you select the shade and prescribe it. So this is important, especially when we're talking about value. We can cut hairs with 3D Master. We can even designate them as half shades. This, for example, is a 0.5 M1. It's between a 0 M1 and a 1 M1 split in half. So that's possible. We use this device for bleaching because we want to be able to track your tooth brightness as it progressively from right to left. As it gets brighter, we want to incrementally and standardize the brightness. So 3D Master was perfectly suited for incremental brightness. It's hard or difficult to say, I shifted your shade 5 shades from what? From A4 to A2. I demonstrated how they're not linear. They're all over the place. So the shifting is not as accurate as something like 3D Master. So this is the ideal shade system for bleaching. And then the 3D Master, not to get confused or get frustrated with 3D Master, it's as simplified as your classical shade system. The only difference is that you group it by value. This is this shade guide here, this value guide is no different than your classical shade guide rearranged by value. The brightest on the left, the darkest on the right. You start in the middle, same as if it was a classical, rearranged by brightness. Start in the middle and go to the left or right. So you've cut your time in half, and then whatever value group, whatever number you fall into that shade, then you pull it out of the box, and now you hone in on the specific color, chroma, and value, as well as the hue. So two-step process, very quick, very clean. Again, don't get too confused or frustrated with the new designation. No, it's not A1, A2, D2. It has numbers, a letter, and a number. But each shade tab has that etched onto the shade tab, the metal handle. So whatever it falls on, that's what you record, right? All these are, again, whether it's A2 or 2M1 in this example, those are classifications. Those are labels so that when we go to select a material, it is the closest matching color label that's possible for that individual patient. So it's a very clean, very nice, easy to do shade system. Again, all shade VITA shade tabs except for the VITA block shade guide and those materials. Your 3D Master, linear guide, and or your classical shade guide, they are metal ceramics, specialized metal ceramics. If you look real close, they do have some opaciousness inside the tab on each one. So you only have the middle third combined with the opaque, the dentin, the opacious dentin, and the enamel. That's your designated shade label. Again, we have a shade tab. It designates the base shade, but then we always sometimes have to add characterizations to it, whether it's whitish, a little bit yellowish, whether it's a halo. And then to get the best out of your shade tabs, you want to make sure that they're newer, that they're not old. If you have any shade guides that have the red, just put them in your drawer, put them in your museum. don't use these. These are at a time when VITA produced these, and we actually use stains at the factory and stain the cervical and stain certain areas of each shade tab. And so those are different than today's modern shade gold standard colors. So over time, your shade guides, after disinfecting them, that luster, that glossness will be worn through. So, you know, maybe every 2 to 3 years, you should replace this. This is pretty much the one tool that you use every day, that nobody ever wants to replace. It's about $150, $175, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it's good for 2 or 3 years. So you're looking at what, maybe $50 a year to replace it and make sure that you maintain the one tool that's based on observable visual color that you need to maintain and make sure it's as accurate throughout the years as you're taking shades. So make sure that you have a good condition shade guide, newer shade guide, modern shade guide, because again, as they get dinged up, the luster, the glaze, the natural glaze that we put on these, they can dull out and look much different when they're worn versus when they come out of the factory. So make sure you update your shade guides. And then we're always looking at possible characterization. Once we're able to select the base shade, then what kind of characterizations, individualization is needed. So we selected cervical, middle, and sizal. Do we need to add a little bit more translucency? Do we need to add a little more brightness to the middle? Do we need to add a little bit more chroma to the cervical? That's where your stains come in, right? Your color stains to characterize. And then, of course, all that has to be communicated if you're not doing this chair side, if you're doing it through the lab. Pictures are worth 1,000 words in dentistry. We really need some sort of idea of, when you say, well, it's whitish, well, how much whitish? How thick of whitish? How dense does that white look? Or is it just frosty looking, right? So with a picture, we can identify that and make it quicker and easier and match much better when we deliver a restoration. And then the materials themselves, when you select a material, a brand material, just understand that material's translucency, opacity, so that if you select the right material, it will match your prep, the color of that prep bleeds through, and will it match at the end once it's covering that prep. So we have to take a shade or an ID of that prep, that stump. And sometimes, yes, sometimes we have to mask that stump out before we move forward. You can't switch with, especially the veneer, very thin material, you can't move an A4 stump into a A1 result. That stump is going to bleed through that material because it's so thin, it's going to bleed through, and you'll never achieve the brightness that that patient wants. So look at the material, what it can mask out, what it can't mask out, what you have to individually mask out prior to the start of the case. So it's dependent on that prep and the material that you choose. You know, the more translucent, the grayer it's going to look. So if you need to mask something else out, you need something more opacious, material that's more opacious. But with the opaciousness, you bring up the brightness level. There's more reflection, more light interaction. It reflects more. And so it's going to look more brighter, more opacious. So look at the material. How thick is the restoration going to be? Work with your labs, work with your dentist. Maybe try some of this in. Often between the shade tab and the milled material, usually there is a discrepancy between the shade tab and the material after you mill it, because we look at a shade tab. We compare a shade tab that is metal ceramic with an opaque layer inside. So you have to include some material inside your crown before you start matching it up, before you visually inspect it to see that it is the correct shade. So you need that behind the scenes, the canvas color, to see what the result is after you put a specific crown restoration onto that prep. Because sometimes we're going to over-color it if we don't think that the prep is going to add to the chroma, to that saturation, that no bleed through. And we might over-color it. So all we have to do is just use a composite material, indirect composite material, make a, after your restoration, any ceramic, all ceramic restoration, just make a prep, if you will, a pseudo prep of the color of the stump, and then put them together and match them up, and then do any color changing or polishing. It also helps protect the margins when you polish it and so forth. So here's a good example of a case in which you've got micro-layered. You're looking at, well, I want to fill in the gap. My patient complaining about the spacing. They want to look, in their eyes, normal, no space. You do minimal prep because the teeth are vital. They're good shape. There's really nothing wrong with them. All they're trying to do is do cosmetic. So you need to select a material and prep for a material that might be more transparent, a little bit more like a lens effect. So this is a material, it's called anamic. It's super translucent, down to about 0.2 of a millimeter and then polished. And you can see it's pretty much see-through. And then we may add some stains, some light cured stains to it. But once they're placed, they're so transparent that if the margin and the finish line is done correctly, you can't even tell that these have been modified cosmetically to fill in that gap. It becomes part of the tooth. And then, of course, on your side, do you need a transparent bonding agent, a little bit yellowish or whitish or a mix? So you also have to judge as far as the color of the prep, plus the material, plus the thickness of that material, how much bleed through of that color comes through, and then select the right material and bond it with the right agent. So you may have to go to a zirconia. If you have quite a bit of a discolored preparation, you maybe have to go to zirconia because it completely masks out the underlying prep shade. Denture teeth is no different, right? You have different denture teeth on the market that have different translucencies, and you have different textures. So you need to mimic what the patient's looking for, what you've discussed with your patient as far as texture, as far as translucency, how does it look, what's the outcome. So it's much more than just shade, it's also the material type, the indication. What are you trying to use the material for? To mask out or not mask out? This is an example of using the same material, Serprinity, but using it one translucent and one high translucent. You can see, yes, a little bit more darker, a little bit more chroma here on what, 2-1 on number 9 compared to number 8. It looks a little bit more saturated, a little bit more deeper color, but that's because of the translucency. But look how close we got using the same material to try to mask out underlying dark prep or what do you call it, a post, right? And decayed teeth and so forth. So, sometimes you do have to mix and match with the translucency and or materials, depending on what you're doing. It would be a far different case if you were doing a veneer versus a full crown, right? So you have to maybe select different materials for different objectives, different indications. Teeth that have good background, you can get closer to the final shade of your material so that when you place it over the preps, it comes out, it bleeds through, but it bleeds through with the right color, with the right shade. You're looking for those preps to come through to give you a little bit more color, more of a natural look to them. So the translucency just helps you blend in with those teeth. And then, of course, you know, you need to discover if your patient goes out, whether they need a material that's a little bit more fluorescence or not. Be aware that, you know, zirconia is not very fluorescent. Sometimes we have to use a highly fluorescent glaze to it. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you have to use the right bonding agent for the type of material, whether it's bonded and or possibly conventionally cemented. Most glass is always bonded. This happens to be enamic, but you know, newer materials are coming out on the market. This happens to be a PEEK, pectin type material framework. These are enamics, but you know, they work out well. Or no metal, metal free. They want something more natural. Everything blends in, and the compatibility between the bonding of the framework posts and the restorative material. It's clean, it's nice, and it's long lasting. Implants also, single units, right? Maybe we need something already a little bit more tooth colored as compared to like a very opacious zirconia. We want something, a material that is more force absorbent. The enamic, which is the only true hybrid on the market, VITA enamic, that's over 70% more force absorbent compared to zirconia. And when it comes to implants, we're always trying to protect that abutment implant junction to keep it from any overloads. So a force distributor, a force absorber type material is ideal. And then I mentioned zirconia. Zirconia may be the choice. Just make sure that you are that the zirconia is polished out of the lab and then glazed. If you adjust, make sure that you repolish it. It should always have a polished surface. And as I mentioned, zirconia is a little bit more darker, not as fluorescent, more dead as far as compared to a natural tooth, the fluorescence. So you may have to add some glaze or stains that are going to add to the fluorescence, add to the brightness as needed. And then, of course, if you need to shift the shade, there are now stains available that, let's say you have an A1 and you call me up and say, hey, I need a stain for A1. I'll tell you, okay, all you need is the A bottle. So now we have A, B, C, D. We no longer talk about, if you call me up and say, well, I need a stain for A1, I no longer say, well, you get a little of this yellowish and a little bit of the orangish. You kind of mix them together, and then that'll get close to it. No, now there's A, B, C, D, and then we also have it on the 3D Master as well available. But it's a rescue shade, right? It's not all materials, depending on the how they're fabricated, the material, the thickness, they're not always going to be 100% dead on, but you need to be able to color correct them chair side. So I recommend everyone get a small furnace and be able to do this, or if you have an in-house lab, you know, and just use a little bit of color if you need to. Remember, when you select the material, if you're not sure on the shade, always select the one that you think slightly brighter. Then you can always color it, especially after the prep. But if you select one that's slightly brighter than you think, by the time it goes onto the prep, it may bleed through and give you the right color out in the very start. But if not, you can color stain it, and then at the end of the day, we're really talking about blending it together, making everything look natural, producing translucency where it's needed, providing for characterization where you see it. Remember, you don't have to add any characterization if you don't see it. In fact, most of the materials, especially the VITA materials, you don't even have to glaze them. You can just polish them. They're all wear kind friendly and so forth. But it's blending in, making it look like a natural tooth, not a crown. making sure that those margins are adaptable to the soft tissue. Again, selecting the right amount of material, the thickness at the margin, the preparation, the bonding, and so forth. You have in your armamentarium, you have all the tools necessary to produce and or select the right material, the right shade, and so forth. So I hope this has helped. All of the information, any scientific information I pulled from different various articles and or shows, conferences, and so forth like that. So I have all that information here if you're looking for it. And then just a reminder, anybody who's looking for CE, you'll have a follow-up email that will talk about the registration. We'll use your registration information. So if you provided us with your credentials, if you're a technician CDT, make sure that you provide us with your CDC number so that we can support you at the NBC and or Florida. It's been recorded, so you can always go visit it on our social media, VITA North America YouTube, VITA North America social sites. Just make sure that you give us a couple days and then we'll post it. And again, while you're on there, look at all the other ones. I mean, there's well over 100. We don't give CE on the online videos, but we have videos, short story videos online. We have these recorded webinars, all sorts of different topics. Again, as I mentioned, anywhere from digital dentures to crown and bridge. You name it, we probably have it on it. We have programs from dentists, from state-of-the-art, modern lab technicians that are the best of their field. So we have a lot of stuff to offer that you can look at, review, and give you an idea of different philosophies, different ways to approach things. So that will be recorded soon and will be connected to our social websites. If you need to get a hold of us, we have the help desk that you can go ahead and contact us. There's also Paul or myself that you can connect with. If you're in the field, if you want to get a hold of your local rep, wherever you may be, here's a list of them. It's a long list, so again, maybe you want to come back and visit it online after we've posted the recording. But depending on where you're at, the area is, we pretty much have a representative in your area that will be happy to help you work through any VITA materials or any understanding of the VITA materials. We also have future webinars scheduled. We also are doing some, because of the COVID thing, because it's still been difficult to do hands-on at some of the hotels, we are now doing remote 3-day workshops online. We did one a couple weeks ago on denture setup, went off well. We're going to do these with porcelain as well. Typically what we do, you sign up. There is a fee to it for the materials. You sign up for it. If it's a porcelain course, sign up for it. We will send you a like a starter kit, a 1-shade kit with a model. We'll have you fabricate a coping, and then we'll have you build up step by step with the key opinion leader, the instructor, and it's a over 3-day period. It's 2 hours a day, so it's minimal time out of your day, plenty of time to get away off the bench, follow the instructor, and then learn more about how to work with some of these materials. You'll have real time, be able to ask questions and so forth. So the programs are really nice to do. So let me see about any questions here that we may have had. I haven't been able to check it as we go. So if we were to ask the question here, why 3D Master if I don't find any difficulty using the classical? Well, I think a lot of the issue is that, you know, when you look at the stats, many remakes are done because of a color shade mismatch. And because we think that the classical shade system, that we're buttoned to that, so that we only use that classical shade system, that's the only tool that exists, I think we're afraid to branch out, expand our knowledge, to go to a different shade system. Maybe because, it's an extra cost, of course. It's another $150. But when you look at it, if you combine those two shade systems together, the classical and the 3D master together, you're going to end up with a comprehensive shade selection. The possibilities are pretty much endless. You'll get more closer, more accurate shade visually, and therefore less remakes, and therefore less costly as well. So we are reaching just over the hour time, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Please join us again for another VITA North America remote webinar. Again, we have a lot of different topics throughout this year. We've got a lot of recordings on the social media as well that you can go visit. Give us a couple of days. Today's program will be posted on VITA North America, the YouTube channel, and our social media channels. So I want to thank everybody again for joining us, and have a very nice day wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us. And this ends today's webinar.